Asset protection law, my view, is about the toughest law in America. It covers Medicaid, it covers tax law, estate law, probate. And so the bar to entry for most attorneys is super, super high because of the complexity of the law. And, oh man, think about it. 3 years of law school, about 10 years practice before you can even dream of asset protection law, and then a grind for the rest of your life until you die. But you don't have to do that, because I'm going to teach it to you in 60 minutes. And I say that because, like, what is the one thing that I wish you could walk away with tonight? The one thing I want you to walk away with is there is such a thing as asset protection law. The stress that you are feeling, the law solved that a long time ago. There is a solution. And not only did the law solve it, the law solved that problem with such amazing success that every asset protection attorney since then, like, will never match how successful the very first solution to this problem was. Hold on. Rollo the Viking. Be patient. It'll be fun, I promise. So if you've ever seen, there's a great television show on the History Channel that you can check out on iTunes or wherever, called Vikings. And even if you don't like history, you'll like that show. My wife doesn't. She's neutral as to history. But apparently, the main character, Rollo, I misspoke, Ragnar, is really cute because my wife just loves that show, The Vikings. I like it because of history. And Ragnar's brother in that television show is Rollo. That's his name. And he's based on a real character in history. And that character, Rollo, in history was called Rollo the Horseless, because he was so big, apparently, he couldn't ride a horse. That's a legend. And so he invaded with a bunch of Vikings Paris. And in those days, the Europeans would often pay off the Vikings. Like, your choice is either give them a bunch of money or they kill you and they take your money. So he was so successful against the British, or the French rather, that they gave him a kingdom in France of his own. Just go away and we'll give you all of this land. Well, the land that Rollo was given to rule as a king there was Normandy, France. And in fact, Normandy is land of the Norsemen, Vikings. Now that area, Normandy, of course, when we hear Normandy, we immediately think of the invasion of Normandy, Allied forces in World War II, coming across the British Channel to Normandy, France, to expel the Germans. Now, Normandy, the invasion of Normandy, just think about it in reverse order. So, the descendant of Rollo, like great-great-great-great-grandson, somewhere along there, his descendant was William. We know him as William the Conqueror. And he was a French king with some disputed claim to the throne of England through some complicated thing, and invaded from Normandy to England. Pretty cool, right? And so all his little French buddies, Normans, they invaded England and then eventually conquered all of England in the final battle of Hastings in 1066. 1066. William brought with him across the channel to England French law, French concepts. And one of the concepts brought to England from archaic French law was something called a Logial Title. Now, a Logial Title simply meant, I am divine. I have a divine right to whatever I conquered. Which we know, yeah, no, your divine right was that your sword was bigger, but that's a separate issue. And so all of England is owned by the British, or the new king, me, William, yay. But the problem was he couldn't rule all of it. I mean, he's just one guy. So he, of course, dispelled all the estate owners and reallocated all the land to his allies, all his buddies that fought with him, the lords, in the battle, which makes sense, right? And so all is well. And the rule was like, look, if you give me taxes and if you give me troops when I need them, then you can keep the land that I'm giving you as long as you have a qualified male heir. If you do not have a qualified male heir, then guess what? I get it back. When you pass away, if you can't give it to somebody that's going to do the same thing, give me taxes and troops, has to be a man. That's just the way they were back then. Then it's going to escheat. That's an archaic French term. It's a legal term now, but back then, escheat back to the crown at that transaction of death. Trigger event was death. And okay, so that's just fine. Now, William had a few problems, didn't he? Number one, how does he know when somebody dies? They didn't have Google back then, so how does he know? And number two, how is he going to keep track of all the land? I mean, like, that's a big place, England. And so William did two things. First, he sent out and created the very first plat system. It's called the Book of the Dome, and it's just keeping track of all of the estates in the land in England because he wants to know what he gave away and what he might be able to get back through escheatment. Now, that's the first problem. The second problem is, now that I know what land there is, how do I know when somebody dies? I gave it to Lord John, a knight. He helped me. So John has Blackshire estate. If he has John Jr. to give the estate to, we're good to go. He can keep it. If not, I get it back and I can reallocate it. Well, he didn't know when somebody died, but he was smart enough to know, oh, I know somebody who knows when somebody dies. And that is the local churches. Like every parish, back then it was Catholic churches, but that's before Henry VIII, so there was no king of or Church of England yet. When somebody dies, the priest in the parish will know. They know everything about what's going on in their little village. And so the very first probate courts were set up by William in the churches. They were Ecclesiastical Courts. And this is what William demanded that the parish priests and the court system in the churches told them. Did somebody die that owned an estate? Did they have a qualified male heir? If so, fine. If not, report back to me so that I can take the land. Well, that's fine. I mean, that system worked okay for a while until the plague. Well, the Crusades and the plague. The Crusades, as you know, knights and fighting men would go off to the Holy Land and hopefully come back. A lot of times they did not come back. Well, if they don't come back and their son went with them, or the son died of the plague while they were gone, now all that land's going to escheat back to the crown. And so large tracts of estates were just being taken because of that. And think about the plague. I mean, the plague kind of broke out, and it broke out because there were a bacteria, I believe, on fleas on rats. And a lot of the plague, it decimated the English colony, or land, but we think of population, we think in terms of like cities, but also out on the farms. There's a lot of people being killed, farmers, to include male heirs. And so it's horrible. And so what do you do when you have a problem like that? Well, you go to a lawyer. I mean, like, lawyers they make stuff up. So lawyers were hired by the male owners of estates before we go off to the Crusades, or I've noticed my neighbor has the plague, looks like it's coming this way, what can you do? And the lawyers thought about it, and they realized that the trigger event was a death. Like, as long as Lord John of the estate, the owner of Blackshire, is alive, we're good. But when he dies, there's a transaction that could result in escheatment. So what do we do? Well, back then they did have the concept of joint tenancy, just like we do. Joint tenancy with right of survivorship. And so they created this concept of property interests that could be separated. And so, just like the Roman version, they transferred legal title to, it was usually 3 lawyers, to hold legal title for the benefit of Sir John while he was in England, or John Jr. if Sir John died, or if John Jr. died. Like, maybe there's John the Third. Like, just like, give us time to make sure we have a male heir or qualified heir so we don't lose the estate. Well, what would happen is these 3 lawyers would be given legal title. They couldn't, it wasn't for their benefit, but they held the title. If one lawyer died, that's okay, because we still have 2 remaining. All we have to do is get a young associate attorney from the law firm to step in. And so joint tenancy was always being held legal title within these 3 people in kind of like a rotating basis. So there was never a severance of legal title because of death. Therefore, there was never a trigger event for the parish church to be involved to report back to King William that there is escheatment. And that concept is like a little vague, but just realize what the lawyers did was, like, they created the very first archaic jury-rigged trust to avoid the crown taking the property back. It's like brilliant. Transfer of legal title to one person for the benefit of another that is generational. Crowds go wild.
It's just sort of fascinating because I wish I could travel back in time. Who was the first dude? So we got to call a lawyer. And who was that lawyer? It's lost to history, but the lawyers solved the problem. Here's what they did. They realized that the law split the property interest into 2. And a property interest can be illustrated easily, like an easement. If you own property near a beach or something, and there's no way for your neighbor to get to the beach, maybe they have an easement through your property to get to the beach. Now, you own title to the real estate, but that guy has this interest. Well, the interest back then was escheatment only triggered when legal title transferred. And William screwed up because he split the title into two parts. One was legal title, one was beneficial title. Don't need to know that. It's just like an easement versus the big parcel. And so the lawyers are like, we can actually transfer legal title to our law firm. Never a bad idea to transfer assets to a law firm, just saying. And even back then, there was a thing called joint tenancy with right of survivorship. Follow me? And so just like your bank account, if you have husband and wife joint tenant with right of survivorship, when one spouse dies, title vests automatically in the survivor. Legal title, there's no trigger event because legal title vested by operation of law. And so these crafty lawyers just transferred legal title to these estates for a small attorney's fees and administration fee. And the lawyers in the firm own title. And so when one lawyer died of the plague, they would just go hire a younger lawyer. And it was a constant revolving door of attorneys. It was so successful, legal title never transferred.
you should too. It's getting hot. I'm going to jump in the Caribbean. We're going to go on to the next module, and we're going to talk about purposes. Like in the modern world, what are our choices as to purpose? How does it help us? I'll be back right after this.